We'll get going until we get this work. So last week, we covered Peter. We talked about, it was our second week with Peter because there's so much about Peter. We could have actually just kept going, right? Peter's a great study we could have done for an entire quarter, but that's not our topic. We'll give it a try. There we go. Thank you, Steve. So last week we covered the anatomy of a leader, things that Peter had that Jesus needed to mold, the experiences he went through, and then the qualities. We kind of rushed at the end there. We kind of ran out of time, but we got through his character qualities that came out, and Jesus needed to kind of fine-tune those character qualities and bring them out so that he was the man that he needed to be in order to be a foundation for the church. So this week, we're going to cover Andrew, and we're going to cover these 4 things about Andrew. We're going to kind of go into kind of a background of Andrew, kind of who was Simon Peter's brother, and then we're going to talk about how Andrew put value on individual people, insignificant gifts, and inconspicuous service, and what the importance was that. And what I think we'll find is, while Peter was this kind of loud personality that was always leading and in front, Andrew's not going to be that. Andrew's kind of going to be the opposite of that, right? So who was Andrew? Who was Simon Peter's brother? And what do we know about him, and what's in the Bible that's written about him? Because that's what we've got to go on, right? There's a lot of information on Peter, so you're kind of thinking, well, Andrew was kind of the second in our group of 3. Remember, we took all of the apostles and they were kind of broken into groups of 3, and there was the most important group of 4 at the top. Andrew was part of that group. You would kind of think there would be more information in the Bible about him, but in all honesty, there's not a lot written about Andrew in the Bible. In fact, he's only mentioned 8 times outside of the verses that list him as with the other apostles when we're given the lists of the apostles, right? So what I'd like to do, since we only have 8 of them, I'm going to read them. You guys can follow along if you would like. The first one we're going to start with Matthew 4:18. And I'll try to go slow enough so we can flip through your electronic device or flip through your paper Bible, whatever you got. Okay? So Matthew 4:18 is when the fishermen are called as disciples. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Okay? So that's the first one. The second one is over in Mark chapter 1, verse 16. And this is the parallel to the one we just read. And as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. All right. The next one's down in Mark 1:29. So if you just jump down to verse 29 there. This is where Peter's mother-in-law was healed. It says, now as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. All right, so we learn a little bit more about Andrew there. Now on over Mark chapter 13, verse 3 is the next one. And they kind of go up on the mount in this one. It says, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately. And I didn't continue on. We just wanted the verse. But you notice he's kind of grouped with the same people, right? Each time. So on over in John chapter 1, verse 40, we read, one of the 2 who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. So Andrew kind of gets called by Jesus, right? On down in verse 44, we see his name again. It says, now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. All right, so that gives us a kind of an idea where he's from. And in John 6, verse 8, probably the more famous one we know of. Jesus feeds the 5,000. It says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon's Peter's brother, said to him. So he's mentioned here again. And then the last one, John 12:22. So this is another example. This is like when the Greeks found out they wanted to come and meet Jesus. It says, Philip came and told Andrew, and in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus. And that's it. That's all we know, right? But from all of those, there is some information we can gather about Andrew, right? So we know he's the brother of Simon Peter. Not a shock. It says that in there, right? Now the question is, who's the older brother? Do we know? We don't. You could kind of conjecture who's the older sibling, probably, based on the way Peter behaves and the way typically older siblings behave. Anybody in here an older sibling like me? Or are y'all younger? I'm older by 2 minutes because I'm a twin. And that's what my mom told me. So I'm claiming the 2 minutes and put all my other brothers under me. That's right. Right. I haven't given it up yet. I didn't get hungry and, need the food. So, right. We know he was a fisherman, right? We know where him and Peter were from. We talked about this with Peter. We also know that they apparently had a house in Capernaum, right? So whether I'm assuming they bought the house. We don't know, but it does say their house, right? We also know that he was a devout man because he was seen with John the Baptist. So you don't go following the guy around in the wilderness, right? Unless you believe in what he's preaching. So what else do we know? God, I love the screens. Cuts my top of my pages off. He's not like Peter in a lot of ways. He's kind of the opposite of Peter. And we're going to go through those here in a little bit. He's also the least conspicuous of Peter and Andrew and of many of the other disciples as well. Right? He also was the first disciple called to follow Christ. We read that. He was responsible for bringing Peter to Christ. So we don't end up with all of the great things that Peter did without Andrew, do we? I mean, if he doesn't bring Peter to Christ, it could still have happened, but maybe not.
Can we assume that Andrew was the brother who said, Peter, don't say that, don't do that, don't embarrass me?
Maybe so. And we know he had a zeal for introducing people to Christ because almost in every example we read, it's what he's doing. He's bringing somebody to see Christ, right? So he had a natural knack to bring people to Christ, which I wish I had that kind of zeal because my nerves get in the way a lot of times, and I'm not that, if you approach me and talk, I'm good. But for me to approach you and talk a lot of times, I'll probably hold back a little bit just because I know my personality. And I got to fight that, right? But he definitely had a zeal to bring people to Christ. Now, speaking of siblings, what is a common interaction between, say, an older and a younger sibling? That don't even think of the Bible, just people, kids in general. Yeah.
They hang out together.
So they hang out together. Competition, right? There you go.
Usually the younger one will look up to the older one, and the older one then get lost.
Exactly. I had my youngest brother is 7 years my younger. Me and my twin brother did not want him around. Right? He was too much of a tag along. We told Mom we didn't want to take him along with us. So, traditionally see a lot of competition with kids, right? It's not always bad. Yeah, Bill?
But when it's all said and done, they probably end up loving each other.
Oh, totally, right? I mean, you're around them so much, right? I thumped my equal brother, since he's my twin, right? A lot when I was younger. Got in trouble a lot. Love him to death now. I just think that's natural, right? Probably shouldn't have thumped on him as much, but.
And you also said, he did it.
Oh, exactly. Or my younger one that was younger than that, right? Now, the interesting thing about Peter and Andrew, though, is we don't tend to see that rival kind of competition that we see out of Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob and Esau is a great example of not kind of getting along, which is why I thought it was kind of funny when you brought that up, David, because that was part of my lesson here. But we don't read anywhere where they seem to not get along, right? David? They did, right? Fishing's hard work. You get tired, exhausted. I'm sure there was some bickering, it's just human nature, but they did work together, right? There's this movie that we love at our house. So, A League of Their Own. Do you guys know that movie? Yes, right. So the story's about the girls' baseball team, right? So we love baseball at our house. Doesn't matter if girls are playing, boys are playing, we love it, right? But there's a line in that movie that reminds me of kind of this competition mentality we were talking about, right? So the older sister, Dottie, if you guys remember, they go to find her. She's this great, phenomenal baseball star, and her dad introduces her as, "This is Dottie." And then the little sister comes up, and the dad introduces her as, "This is Dottie's sister." She doesn't even get a name. That's how Andrew and Peter were not like, right? This is how Jacob and Esau were. But I'm reminded of that line all the time when I'm reading things like how Jacob and Esau didn't get along. But with Andrew and Peter, it was all content. They kind of got along together very well, right? In fact, Andrew would have known what Peter was like, right? I mean, this was his brother. He would have known that Peter was probably going to kind of take over with his big personality. And what does he do for Peter? He brings him to Christ. Does he wait? He doesn't wait. He knows Peter's probably going to take over, and he's okay with it. You ever study with someone and look at their personality and go, you have the personality that could bring a lot of people to Christ. Now, I've got to bring you first, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. You kind of get the impression he wanted, like he went looking, like real quick. Hey. Yeah. Yeah. What's that say about Andrew, though, when you've got a brother that's the type of brother we know about Peter, and he goes looking for him and he brings him real quick? Loves him, exactly.
I give you a 51% probability that Andrew was the older brother.
Yeah, maybe. What'd you say?
I said maybe he figured that these would straighten him out.
At least it couldn't hurt to give it a try, right? Andrew seems to be fine with just letting Peter shine throughout the Scripture and just kind of taking a back seat, right? How many people you know in the church are perfectly content to do the small things, and you never really know that they're doing anything? They might be writing cards, they might be back in the workroom prepping things, it might be down in the kitchen cleaning up and taking care of things. You don't even know they're doing it, right?
Whether that's being meek or being humble.
It'd be both, right? This was the type of person Andrew was, and we're going to see that even more as we go on here. The question is, are we willing to do the same thing? Are we willing to take care of the small stuff and be okay that that's enough for Christ?
If I was Andrew, I would probably follow Jesus because I'm not that crazy about fishing.
The scripture never attaches any dishonor to Andrew. We don't see him kind of arguing like we do the James and John, right? When he goes off and he speaks, which we rarely see in the scripture, he seems to say everything right. He doesn't seem to say anything wrong. So, for all intents and purposes, Andrew's a quiet servant who's doing all things right for Christ. Is kind of the picture we're starting to get. Now here's the thing. Is the way Andrew is doing his ministry, it's different than Peter's, we know. Is there anything wrong with either one? It's not, is there? That's the beauty of teaching someone about the Word. We have different ways of doing it. I'm not a preacher. Larry can preach. He can stand up here and preach. There's other men in this congregation who do a great job at that. I can stand in front of a class and teach a class. There's some of you that are very good, like Brother Floyd back here, I know, because I've sat through his, is very good at one-on-one going to people just right out of the blue and talking to someone, right? The church needs to be made up of that. We can't all be the same, right? So, the value of an individual person. Simply put, Andrew saw the importance of bringing people to Christ. He brought Peter to Christ. He brought the boy with the loaves to Christ. In fact, in the story with the loaves, who's the first one that kind of speaks up? Do you recall? It's one of the disciples. So Jesus says, here's the people, let's feed them, right? And he does this to test them. And who's the first one to speak up? Right. So prior to that, Philip, he digs around, he says, this is all the money we got, right? This is all the money we got. Andrew's the one who kind of says, to what Tom's point is, here's the boy with the fishes. Now, you kind of get the sense that Andrew kind of sees the big picture, right? He understands that Jesus wants to meet people, but he also needs this young boy to accomplish what task is about to happen, right? So Andrew has enough faith to say, well, here's some fish and some bread. Christ, you can do whatever you got to do with this and make it happen, right? He's not kind of focused on the material pieces where Philip gets caught up in, and we'll talk about that when we get to Philip. But
he kind of shows us that he has some leadership abilities by connecting people.
mm-hmm. Exactly. His leadership ability comes in personal interaction, right? Personal. So, to that, really, successful evangelism is done on a personal level. This has been one of the things we've talked about all year at this congregation. In fact, I think it was it in January? Larry, you may remember, when you challenged us to pick one person and to pray for them, right? Are you still doing that? With the idea that they come to Christ? Have you taken the opportunity? Has any doors been opened because of those prayers and you step through and try to talk? Right? That's where the real change is going to happen, isn't it? When we're interacting with people individually. I have a great relationship with the people that I work with at work when I go into the office all the time. I don't work with any of you where I work at, so would it make sense for you to have a relationship with them? No. Just like it doesn't make sense for me to have a relationship with the people you have in your circle, right? But they're not going to know Christ unless I step through the door when the opportunity presents itself. Andrew was always stepping through the door. The part about Andrew was he would create a door sometimes when he just would whatever. He'd just start talking to someone. And he had no problems bringing them to Jesus, right? How many people tend to come to Christ through that interaction versus sitting here in a large setting listening to a sermon on Sunday morning?
Most people will be invited. They won't just show up at the church building.
No, exactly. So they're not going to show up in the first place. So they're going to need to be invited. All right? There's Andrew again, inviting people. All right? But just because you invited him here, Larry's preaching a 30-minute sermon every Sunday, is that enough? That's not enough, is it? No. You got to keep working behind the scenes, let's say. Use the relationship you have. That's Andrew. Andrew saw the importance of each person, right? In fact, over in John 6:37, we read, "All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out." Andrew understood what that meant. Right? He understood, hey, these people need to see Jesus. Let's get him there, right? You also don't see Andrew standing up preaching like Peter did, though, right? Peter was the one that stood up on the day of Pentecost and preached to the thousands that was in attendance. And that worked great for Peter. That was not Andrew. Both work. So which one are you, right? Where's your talent lie? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So what Larry was saying is, we can't stop if they're willing to come with us to services. We've got to continue that personal evangelism because that's where you make the impact and that's where they come to Christ. Right? We can't just say, all my work is done and brush our hands of it. Right? Now, the beauty of bringing them to services, though, I'll piggyback on what Larry's saying, is you got other people there that you can introduce, and now you got more than just yourself that can talk to them about Christ, right? Small things, so we talked about individual people matter to Andrew. Small things matter to Andrew, right? So, in the feeding of the 5,000, we'll get back to that. Jesus, the people gather around Jesus, getting late, they need to feed them. Jesus says, all right, let's feed these people. And John tells us that he does this for a reason. He does this so Jesus could test them to see what their response is. Philip is the first one to speak up. And Philip is rummaging around to see how much money they have in the money bag. And he comes back and he says, we're not even close, right? We're not going to have a chance to buy food. Andrew, in the meantime, is looking for something that Jesus could use to feed these people with. So lo and behold, here's a boy, bread, fish. Obviously not enough, but he has faith in Christ, right? He understands that Christ can take these small things and he can do great things with them. Do we have that kind of faith? Do we trust that Christ, maybe it's bringing someone, maybe it's simply the prayer that Larry asked us to pray for someone, that is enough to get someone to come to Christ, to open a door for us? Or do we feel like we have to make the door? Are we looking for the door? Ozie?
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful point. Too often, we as children of God, we have such small and limited views on things. And we serve a God that literally can do anything,
Yep.
has done. Just so our limitations are simply in our mind. You know, and I'm talking very specifically about those things that we can do in service of the Lord. There are no limits,
Right.
not with God.
So what Ozie is saying is we limit ourselves from the capability of the great things God can do. If we're willing to look past our own limitations, the sky's the limit, let's say, for the things that we could do for God and for Christ. The way I word it is this. Go ahead.
To the last point that you just made, I think that's really the important, what Larry was stressing in January, praying for that person and an opportunity. You're actually allowing God to do His piece.
Yep.
And pray that you have the strength and the courage to step through the door.
Yeah. I know I've heard you say this. I've heard several of you other men who've taught say this. When you pray for something, do you prepare yourself for a yes answer whenever you pray? Meaning, if you pray that a door are open, are you constantly looking for the door that's open? Or are you just praying to be praying so you can check that off a list and you don't pay any attention to what God's doing around you? Right? Mike?
I've used the phrase in a number of conversations with people to say, be careful what you pray for, you just might get it. And if you get it, you better be ready to use it.
Yep. So Mike points out, he's used the phrase, be careful what you pray for, because it might just happen. Now you got to be ready to use it when it does happen. Right? It is not the greatness of the gift that counts, but rather the greatness of the God to whom it is given. Does God really need us or gifts to make something happen? Did He need those fish and bread to feed those people? He didn't, did He? He could have done it however He wanted. But it was a test, and Andrew passed the test. Andrew's faith was strong enough to say, here's something small, you do something great with it, Jesus.
As the scriptures point out, miracles were not made for God. God knows God. They were made for man to know who God is.
Yeah. So Leslie points out that the miracles were made for man to know who God is. Right? Did I get it all? To piggyback on the individual, the value of individual gifts, you guys, over in Luke 21, if you want to turn there, the parable of the widow and the two mites. This should be familiar with all of us, hopefully. So verses 1 through 4 reads, "And he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury, and he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, Truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all, for all of these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had." That's a testament to someone's faith. Andrew had that faith. He knew whatever he brought to Christ, Christ could make something great happen out of it, right? So do we have that same faith? That's a tough one, right? If you throw a few extra dollars in the plate, it might impact you if you're on a tight budget. Do you have faith that it'll be all right? Right? Maybe job's not going too well. Do you have faith that your prayers will get answered? The value of inconspicuous service. Do you need to be seen in your work for Christ? That's essentially what this is about. Andrew did these things and didn't seem to care whether anybody saw him or not. We're glad they were recorded in the Bible because we needed this lesson for ourselves. But Andrew, to Dan's point earlier, humility, right? A humble servant, one who's willing to do the small things. Yeah, Dan.
Well, some people are people type of person. They're so social that, they have to be in the limelight in front of other people. Whereas other people are kind of more, some people are task orientated. And so they can be behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. So Dan points out that some people actually are very good at being seen in front of people, while others are better suited to work behind the scenes kind of from a task standpoint, right? And that is true. Some people are suited very good to be in front of groups. That was Peter. Is there anything wrong with that? No. Now the problem with that becomes when you step in front of the group because it's about you, right? It's not about the message you're trying to take to someone. That's when it becomes the problem. And that doesn't matter whether you're good at speaking in front of a large group and you need that, or whether you work behind the scenes or not. You can work behind the scenes and still want it to be all about you, right? We talked a little bit about servant leadership multiple times this year already. Andrew was that. For all intents and purposes, he looked for opportunities to take care of the small needs. And he had faith that that was enough to have something big be done with it. Right. Now take James and John, for example. Their mom asks, who's going to sit on the left and who's going to sit on the right? Right? What about when they wanted to call down fire on the Samaritan village? Because they thought they were better than the Samaritans because the Samaritans turned away Christ? Right?
Well, there were times when the apostles thought it was a little bit beneath them to have to serve the meal. And sometimes they said, well, let the women prepare the meal. I mean, there are instances of that where the apostles said, well, we're going to do the preaching and let the women prepare the lunch.
Andrew pretty much epitomized what Ephesians 6:6-8 says. And it reads, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. Are we willing to take second place and basically be in a support role? My whole life at IBM has been in an organization in IBM called support. I do not write the products. There's many of you who do a good job of that. I'm the one that people call when you write a bad product and I have to fix it, right? But in that line of work, it's just a matter of fix, move on. Fix, move on. You cannot fight with the ones that wrote the bad. You just say, here you go. Let's fix it and move on. Right? Some of you are laughing because you're the ones that's got to hear from someone like me whenever I tell you that it's not working how you said it's supposed to work, right? But what that has taught me is you can't be butting heads with people at all, right? You just simply have to, if there's some issue going on, you just fix it and move on. Same in the church, right? If there's something that needs done, are you willing to just do it? Does it have to be some big thing for you to say yes to do it? I know we have all these Bible class teachers back here that'd be more than glad to help get lessons prepared. There's many of you in here that teach the Bible classes. That's a big work, right? Go ahead, Dan.
If you want to be a valuable person in the business world, you're much more valuable to your boss if you're the guy who wrote the program versus the guy who's running the program on the computer, because you can fix it, whereas the other guy, he can only run the program.
Right, right. We never see Andrew preaching to the multitudes. He doesn't seem to be founding of any congregations. He's not like Peter's got a book, 2 books in there after him, right? We don't see any of that. He's just doing these small things, and he's content to do that. We've got to move. We're going to run out of time. So, this should be, yes, good. We're at the end. It takes a special kind of person to be a leader with the servant's heart, because you have to be willing to humble yourself and put yourself beneath someone else to do a job, right? Those of us that are married, it's my responsibility to put my wife above me and take care of her needs, right? I don't have a choice in the matter. Scripture says that's what I have to do. I'm not to lord over her. I'm to take care of her, right? That same mentality is no different if there's a need in the church from one of you. I'm supposed to help, right? Doesn't matter what I do. I'm there to help. Do we care more about the recognition or more about hearing the Lord say to us, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant"? Servant. He doesn't say, "Well done, good and faithful preacher, elder, deacon, teacher, wife, husband, child." Servant. Right? That's what Andrew was. That's who Andrew was. So next week, we're going to jump into James. Food for thought I'll leave you with, because was that the second bell? I think it was, right? Is passion a bad thing? Because we're going to find out James has a lot of it. Can it be good? Can it be bad? Don't have to answer, but think about it. Go read up on James and come back next week. We'll talk. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is good to see you all on this evening. Just want to spend a few minutes with you and hopefully try to provide you with some encouragement. And I want to start off by asking you a question. And this question is, have you ever had a bad day? Have you ever had one of those really tough days where you just, it was, I think we've all been there. But you know what? God has given us a prescription so that more of our days will be better days than those bad days. So, if you will turn in your Bibles with me to Philippians chapter 4, we're going to consider a very familiar verse. But what we want to do is we really want to focus on one word that we're going to see in this particular verse that will hopefully help us to have more better days than bad days. And so in Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse number 8, the Bible reads, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you." So, this is the prescription. What is it that we are meditating on. During the course of the day, we watch some news, we listen to the radio, we hear stuff at work, and so much of it is the opposite of what we have just read. Is that right? But that's not where we have to stay. God is trying to help us to understand where we need to fix our minds. He understands the drudgery of this world that we live in. And if we allow those things to permeate our brain waves and to be on our hearts and minds, oh my goodness, it's no wonder we have some bad days from time to time, right? But if we consider, if we think on those things that are noble, that are just, that are pure, that are lovely, where there is virtue, things that are praiseworthy, if we are meditating on these things, then the God of peace will be with us. And peace makes for better days. Is that all right? God has given us everything that we need for life and godliness. We don't have to go searching, for all the get well books. He's given it to us in His Word. We just need to kind of simplify our lives sometimes and think about those things. So, here's the exercise for the next 15 seconds. Think of something that's good, something that's pure, something that's lovely, something that is a good report. What is it? Find it. Think about it. There's got to be something there. God has been great to you today, hasn't He?
Amen.
We've experienced some blessings today, yesterday. We've got some great things to look forward to tomorrow. These are the things that we need to meditate on. And finally, the word meditate, that means to give thoughtful consideration, to focus on it. Not just a passing, fleeting thought. Grab it and hold on to it. Meditate on those things that are lovely. And the God of heaven will bless your soul with a peace that surpasses all understanding. That's my message for you this evening. I hope that it has encouraged you not only today, but will encourage you throughout every day of your life, so that the bad days will fade and every day will become a better day. If you have a need for the congregation to pray for you and to pray with you, we're about to sing a song to allow you to come forward so that you can make your prayer request known. If you have been studying the Word of God and you found that you are outside of the ark of safety and you have realized that it is time for you to obey the gospel and put on Christ in baptism, as we say, the water is warm and we're here to assist you with that need as well. So whatever your need may be, stand as we sing this song of invitation.